How's it going, everybody? Last episode, we covered faith, and in this episode, I'm going to be discussing the role that the control of information and our biases play and how both religion and leftism control their members. There are many forces at work when it comes to epistemology and how people come to believe in the things that they do, and there are certain things that happen in everyone's brain that prevents them from looking at things objectively. Religion and politics are the two biggest areas where these faults in thinking most obviously come to the surface. By the way, these reasons I'm about to get into are why you'll never be able to talk someone out of the church that they're in, or their beliefs about socialism, or Marxism, or, almost anything. This really does apply to the difference in thought on almost anything. Let's start with the backfire effect, and I'll read you something that does a good job of describing that. The backfire effect: why facts don't always change minds. In a perfectly rational world, people who encounter evidence that challenges their beliefs would first evaluate this evidence and then adjust their beliefs accordingly. However, in reality, this is seldom the case. Instead, when people encounter evidence that should cause them to doubt their beliefs, they often reject this evidence and strengthen their support for their original stance. This occurs to a cognitive bias known as the backfire effect. The backfire effect is important to understand since it affects both your ability to change the other person's opinion as well as your ability to process information rationally yourself. The backfire effect is a cognitive bias that causes people who encounter evidence that challenges their beliefs to reject that evidence and to strengthen their support of their original stance. Essentially, the backfire effect means that showing people evidence which proves they are wrong is often ineffective and can actually end up backfiring by causing them to support their original stance more strongly than they previously did. As such, the backfire effect is a subtype of the confirmation bias, which is a cognitive bias that can cause people to reject information which contradicts their beliefs or to interpret information in a way that confirms those beliefs. The backfire effect has been observed in a number of scientific studies which looked at various scenarios. A study that examined voting preference showed that introducing people to negative information about a political candidate that they favor often causes them to increase their support for that candidate. A study which examined misconceptions about politically charged topics that giving people accurate information about these topics often causes them to believe in their original misconception more strongly in cases where the new information contradicts their pre-existing beliefs. A study which examined parents' intent to vaccinate their children found that giving parents who are against vaccination information showing why vaccinating their child is the best course of action, they sometimes become more likely to believe in a link between vaccination and autism. Overall, the backfire effect influences people in many domains, and it has a notable influence when it comes to people's widespread support of various pseudoscientific beliefs, and it explains why attempts to debunk those beliefs are often ineffective. And it can also affect people when it comes to any type of belief. My dad would always say that the truth will set you free, but first it will make you mad. But for most people, it just makes them mad. There's no liberation afterwards. And that's due to certain psychological factors. Realistically, how many people lean into information that goes against the narrative they believe? When you are arguing about something specific with someone, you're never really arguing over just that one thing. You are, in a way, arguing with their entire worldview. Let's use the flat earth argument as an example. For me to believe that the world is flat, I have to start questioning everything about that idea. If the world is flat, then how are satellites working? How is my phone working right now? Or the TV? Or the GPS? There's super complicated equations that all work to make satellites operate safely. Are those wrong too? Farmers have to calculate the curvature of the world to get straight lines when they're harvesting. What about that? Pilots have to constantly change their altitude to adjust to the atmosphere because it follows the curvature of the Earth. And every planetary object we see in space is round. I guess that's just one big lie then, from every major observatory and scientific institution in the world. That one statement that the Earth is flat, it triggers my defenses, and I'm immediately less open to embracing that idea than I would be normally. And conversely, if I see something that agrees with my internal narrative, I'm much more likely to embrace that. In essence, the backfire effect and confirmation bias works like this. If it agrees with my pre-existing beliefs, then it's true. If it contradicts my pre-existing beliefs, then it's false. It's hard to find a better example of this than in the statements of faith that Christian apologists put on their websites. Here's Ken Ham from AnswersInGenesis.com. No apparent, perceived, or claimed evidence in any field, including history and chronology, can be valid if it contradicts the scriptural record. Here's a statement from the Greater Houston Christian Association. The Bible is the divinely inspired Word of God. Because it is inspired throughout, it is completely free from error, scientifically, historically, theologically, and morally. Thus, it is the absolute authority in all matters of truth, faith, and conduct. The final interpretation of the Bible is the Bible itself. God's world must always agree with God's Word, because the creator of one is the author of another. Thus, where physical evidences from creation may be used to confirm the Bible, these evidences must never be used to correct or interpret the Bible. The written word must take priority in the event of any apparent contradiction. You see? So anything that proves the Bible right is obviously true, and anything that proves it wrong is obviously false. Here's Bob Jones University, and this is from their student biology curriculum. This is their definition of revealed truth. That which is revealed in Scripture, whether or not man has scientifically proved it. If it is in the Bible, it is already true without requiring additional proof. And here's their definition of a fallacy. That which contradicts God's revealed truth, no matter how scientific, how commonly believed, or how apparently workable or logical it may seem. The same thing is going on in the leftist brain when it comes to something like the 2020 election. It was the most secure election ever, and no amount of evidence will ever change their mind on that. In fact, you could take the Bob Jones statement, substitute the subject matter, and everything would stay the same. Revealed truth. That which is revealed by the mainstream media, whether or not conservative media has debunked it. If it is on CNN, then it is true without requiring additional proof. And a fallacy would be that which contradicts CNN's revealed truth, no matter how scientific or commonly believed, or apparently how workable or logical it may seem. When you purposefully lock yourself out of accessing areas where the truth is, you create intentional blind spots so that you can never be proven wrong and your worldview is conveniently always correct. This information control leads to the confirmation bias and other faults in people's thinking because they don't have access to all the information and they don't want to have access. They don't even want to know about it. For example, Scientology has the Sea Org, which is ran as sort of a quasi-military naval ship, where it houses the church's most devout members. It has very strict internet access, as the leaders of Scientology know that there is a lot of information out there against them. And so, to prevent the possibility of people leaving en masse, they have to censor and hide embarrassing information. I want to play a clip from a podcast I heard with Chris Shelton. Chris worked for the Church of Scientology for 8 years, almost right out of high school. And then he went and worked for the Sea Org and went to serve the church for a total of 27 years. He was actually in the documentary on Netflix with Leah Remini on Scientology. He became disillusioned with the church and left the Sea Org, but his faith in the teachings were still strong. The religion was real to him, just not the leadership or the organization he had been in before. But he was curious, and since information had been hidden so long, he was tempted to find out if there was anything to it. And since he had newly found freedom, he started to dig in.
I had seen some things when I was in, despite having the internet filter and despite, my thought policing, I still had some things break through the armor, enough to see that organizationally there were problems. And it got me curious what else was out there. So now that I had unrestricted access, and I'm a bit of a voracious reader, I got curious and I started looking.
Which is always dangerous.
Yes. Well, when you're a cult member, it sure is. So, I did not know I was a cult member. I mean, I'd never, ever, I'd heard the word. I laughed it off. I used to joke about it. I used to say, oh, yeah, sure, we're all a cult. Scientology is a cult. Of course it is. And so is the Catholic Church, if you look up the definition of the word. So what's the big deal, right? I would just slough it off with that was about as deep as my thinking would go. So once I had unrestricted access, I started plunging down the rabbit hole. And man, it goes down quite a ways. And that was, 3 months of just solid just sleepless nights, up, just reading, watching South Park, watching Tom Cruise make a fool out of himself, watching all this information, reading tons of stuff that I had not been exposed to in Scientology, or worse, had actually been lied to when I was in Scientology. There are a lot of lies about L. Ron Hubbard and his life. I came to learn there's this term called hagiography, which is the biography of a religious leader according to the religion he was a leader of. And hagiographies are always, works of fiction. And L. Ron Hubbard's hagiography in Scientology is a complete fiction, but we all thought it was totally true. In fact, this is probably the biggest one of all, is that he served in World War II, and he was an officer, and he had command of a ship for a while. He claimed that he saw action in Australia. He claimed that he bombed a submarine, shelled a submarine off the coast of Oregon, and that he had all these other adventures in the Navy. Well, we come to find out he never saw a single day of combat.
Wow.
And he said that at the end of the war, he suffered war wounds that blinded him and left him lame and hospitalized, and his family gave up on him. And it was only because he took a year at the Oak Knoll Medical Naval Hospital, and he studied up on the endocrine system and hormones and the body and how the body is put together and the nervous system. And by combining that information with his studies of Freud and psychoanalysis and other things he had picked up over the years through the application of all this stuff that he learned, he claimed that he healed himself and that he used those principles to develop what became Dianetics, and that he used them on other people at the Oak Knoll Hospital after he had cured himself, and he cured them too. Mm-hmm. And this was supposed to be the basis of Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, which was published in May 1950. And that was the basis of what became Scientology a couple years later. It's a very interesting story, and there's a lot to it. But this is the point being that we were told all of this, and then I find out afterwards that his actual naval records show no combat, no war wounds, no year-long stay at Oak Knoll Naval Hospital. He was flitting around instead down in Southern California practicing the occult with Jack Parsons in Pasadena, California. Funny enough, about 5 minutes away from where I grew up. Finding out lies of that magnitude clearly shook everything I thought I knew since I was a little kid. I mean, I was raised with this. So I had lots of emotional and, mental investment in Scientology being true. I'd spent a good chunk of my life peddling this stuff and believing it, totally believing it. And I'd actually believed in a whole bunch of lies, and I had been taken advantage of, and I had been used basically like a pawn on a chessboard. That had been my position for most of my life, and I had been entirely clueless about it. And to this day, I still don't have the words to describe what it felt like to learn all that, but it was not a pleasant experience.
Religion and leftism frames the person brave enough to look at those contradictory things as taboo, heretical, sinful, a conspiracy theorist, politically incorrect, racist, homophobic, etc., etc. There's built-in defenses for when the little sheep strays from the flock and finds the hole in the fence that they weren't supposed to find. This is why they constantly work to try to take Tucker Carlson off the air. This is why priests were once the only ones allowed to read the Bible. This is why they hate the spread of so-called misinformation, because they're trying to do damage control. The next factor at work is the Dunning-Kruger effect. It is the phenomenon of having the confidence of an expert while only having the knowledge of a beginner. It is the idiot who repeats the mainstream talking points without having the slightest clue of the depth of the topic that they're talking about. How many people who are passionate about climate change can name 5 different types of clouds? And how many Southern Baptists in Kansas can name the basic tenets of 5 other religions? The answer for both is probably not many. Here's Ben and Jerry of Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream Company explaining why they refuse to sell ice cream in Israel anymore.
Ben & Jerry's announced its decision to stop selling ice cream in Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories. Were you surprised by the backlash that came after that?
No, I wasn't surprised. And yet when it happens, it's still painful.
You have some loyal customers who think that the move is anti-Semitic. You're both Jewish men. How did it feel personally to be wrapped up in accusations of being anti-Semitic?
Totally fine.
For some reason, I think Jerry's answer is going to be different.
It's absurd. I mean, no. I mean, what? I'm anti-Jewish? I mean, I'm a Jew. Well, my family is Jewish. My friends are Jewish, I mean.
Can you help me understand why this decision came now? This conflict has been going on for years.
We're always in favor of a two-state solution. The policy of the Israeli government has been to endorse these settlements in the occupied territories that keep on making it harder and harder to actually have a two-state solution.
In what way do you both feel that, withholding money or taking money from somewhere is a way to hold someone accountable?
Well, in terms of Israel, I don't view it as withholding money. It's just saying we don't want our ice cream sold in the occupied territories.
Right. But that affects the economy to an extent.
Not much. I mean, it's a drop in the bucket.
So then is that really a big stand?
It's not a financial stance. It's a policy stance.
If you disagree with the Israeli government policy, why not just stop sales completely?
Well, I disagree with the U.S. policy. We couldn't stop selling in the U.S. I think it's fine to be involved with a country, to be a citizen of a country, and to protest some of the country's actions. And that's essentially what we're doing in terms of Israel. We hugely support Israel's right to exist, but we are against a particular policy.
You guys are big proponents of voting rights. Why do you still sell ice cream in Georgia? Texas, abortion bans. Why are you still selling there?
I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't know what that would accomplish. We're working on those issues of voting rights and. I don't know. I think you ask a really good question, and I think I'd have to sit down and think about it for a bit.
Every woman who lives in Texas now is going to have an impossible time getting an abortion. If you're a woman who lives in Texas, you have now been stripped of those rights because of the Texas government.
By that reasoning, we should not sell any ice cream anywhere. I've got issues with what's being done in most every state and most every country.
I think one thing that's different is that what Israel is doing is considered illegal by international law. And so I think that's a consideration.
You notice all the shoulder shrugs and the body language and the horrible answers? These men are idiots. They are completely willing to make business decisions based on ideas they have never fully thought through before and have no justification for believing in them other than it's a required belief if you're on the left. So therefore, it's good enough for them. And they were so confident in their beliefs and actions, they went on national TV to defend them. And that's what they had. AOC is the perfect example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. She has the confidence of an expert and yet is a complete doofus on every issue she talks about. There simply is no replacement for experience or knowledge gained over time. And as we've seen in people, it's almost impossible to change people's minds anymore because they haven't been on the same journey that we've been on. I can't blame someone for not understanding what I'm talking about when they are 5,000 miles behind in the journey. I cannot expect someone who has never seriously worked out, much less worked out seriously for 10 years, to come in and bench press 450 pounds. That's not fair to them. I once saw a sign in a doctor's office that said, "Don't confuse your Google search for my medical degree." There is no replacement for expertise, which is knowledge over time. We can all remember our first day at work, or the first time trying to learn an instrument, or the first time working out. It's often an embarrassing, humbling experience. You can spend 2 weeks of solid practice on the guitar, only able to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in a jilted, staggered, strained way. Once finished, you'll shake your hand from the pain of not having calluses yet. But ironically, when discussing ideas or philosophy or having their religious or mental dogmas challenged, people have no inhibitions to giving their opinions. When I was in driver's ed, I learned that a moving train hitting a car on the tracks was analogous to your car running over a pop can in terms of the momentum and the forces involved, and just how little pushback the car is to the train. And it also seems analogous to the ability of a stupid person to blow through obstacles such as facts and reason or being wrong on the way to their dogmas and pre-existing beliefs. They don't seem to experience their thoughts as incomplete. They don't see the blind spots in their own arguments. They don't see their own hypocrisy, and they never feel as though they are too uneducated to answer any given question. And there's no mental shaking of the hands when confronted with a problem they logically cannot get out of. I found this to be a very common through line in most people's lives. On the extremely local level, you'll find that almost no one knows what they're talking about, and who can't provide objective evidence for the things they believe in. Instead, they're only capable of giving the cliche bumper sticker religious and political talking points as if those are somehow death blows to any given debate on the issue. And it's not just friends or maybe your family. It goes up as high as you want to go. Everyone, Bernie Sanders, Nancy Pelosi, everyone, they're all giving the same preloaded, extremely unsatisfying responses to your questions. And I've realized that most people believe in things for extremely bad reasons. But the media and the left purposefully lead people off these paths of knowledge to limit their understanding and to keep them believing in things for bad reasons. In Orwell's 1984, they limit the speech so that the ideas that those words mean are simply gone and foreign to people. The left has hijacked the education system in order to produce little incurious morons who just go with the flow and will willingly defend most liberal talking points without much consideration if they're true or not. And as we'll see in the next episode on dogma, information control is a very necessary step to insulating people from the truth. Not only do people have a tendency towards biases, but religion and leftism take advantage of those for their own power and magnify them in people. Anyways, that's all the time I have for today. If you like this video and type of content, consider giving this video a like or maybe subscribing. I'll see you all in the next episode of this series. Peace.